Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to our press room today. Apologies for the delay we had. This is due to a technical issue we had with our broadcaster. Executive Vice President Vestager, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Today is a big win for European citizens and for tax justice. The Court of Justice confirms the European Commission's decision from 2016. Ireland granted Apple unlawful aid, which Ireland now has to cover. It's a final judgment. The court also confirms the Commission's decisions in the Google shopping antitrust case, and it's a final judgment. The court has confirmed us, and let me talk first about the Apple judgment and the Apple case in itself. Judgment is a win for the Commission. It's also a win for the level playing field within the single market and for tax fairness. At the start of my first...
Excuse me, there seems to be an issue with sound.
Yeah.
Can we just pause for a second? Apologies. We might have to get a microphone.
It's not the deep state, it's deep tech that we are up against here today. Sure, we'll switch next turn. Okay, I take it from the top because the top is great. Today is a big win for European citizens and for tax justice. The Court of Justice confirmed the decision from 2016 by the European Commission. Ireland granted Apple unlawful aid, which Ireland now has to recover. And this judgment is final. The court also confirms the Commission decision in the Google shopping antitrust case. And also this is a final judgment. Let me first talk about the Apple case and the judgment in itself. It's a win for the Commission. It's also a win for the level playing field of the internal market and for tax justice. At the start of my first mandate as Commissioner for Competition, aggressive tax planning was already catching public attention. Multinationals were brought before parliamentary committees in the US and in the UK to explain their hidden tax arrangements. A seismic shift was occurring. Corporate tax avoidance was put in the spotlight by investigative journalism as the consortium that brought us the LuxLeaks. And they revealed that some corporations, they pay almost no tax within the European Union by using and abusing loopholes and asymmetries between different tax systems. And that few member states were relying on tax rulings and aggressive tax planning arrangements to become a more attractive destination for multinational investment. This harmed other member states and the European taxpayer, of course. State aid granted in the form of fiscal advantages is nothing new, and it was nothing new. Still, the investigations into tax rulings led the Commission into uncharted territory. We were supported in our actions by the European Parliament, civil society, and European citizens who were demanding a public response. But of course, this implied that there was legal risks. The Commission investigated several of these tax rulings and aggressive tax planning measures under state aid rules in the built-in excess profit case, the Amazon case, Fiat case, and the Apple case. There were more. These are just a few of them. Today, the Court of Justice confirmed our decision in the Apple case. In the decision in 2016, the Commission concluded that 2 Irish tax rulings constituted illegal state aid. They had artificially lowered taxes paid by Apple in Ireland since 1991. The Commission considered this to be a misapplication of Irish tax rules and ordered Ireland to recover up to 13 billion of euros from Apple. These tax rulings attributed the bulk of taxable profits of two Irish subsidiaries of Apple to what was a stateless head office. These head offices, they existed only on paper. No tables, no chairs, no activities. The profits were thus not taxed anywhere. As one example, in 2011, one of Apple's Irish subsidiaries recorded profits of approximately 16 billion euros. Of these, thanks to the tax rulings, only 50 million euros were taxable in Ireland. So the subsidiary paid less than 10 million of taxes in Ireland in 2011, an effective tax rate of 0.05% of these overall annual profits. 0.05%. More concretely, today the Court of Justice confirmed the Commission's approach that the intellectual property license by Apple's Irish subsidiaries and related profit should have been allocated to the Irish branches, and that Apple should have paid taxes worth 13 billion on all related profits in Ireland. This means that the recovered taxes, which has been on an ESCO account now for quite some years in Ireland during these ongoing court proceedings, well, they must be released to the Irish state. We have had judgments already. Some of them we have lost. We have had the win today. We have not had a lot of time to go through the judgment of today, but still I think there are two main takeaways. First, even though the tax rulings do not escape EU state aid control, member states have the exclusive competence to define their corporate tax system. Second, the Commission can exercise control to avoid that undertakings receive an unfair tax advantage through rulings that derogate from national law, domestic case law, or administrative practices. So once the member states have exercised their fiscal sovereignty, the tax administration needs to abide to its own rules. The Commission carries the burden of proving that the member states deviated from their own practices. And this is what the court has confirmed in the Apple case. There is a bigger picture. Our investigations have decisively contributed to a mind shift, a change of attitude among member states. They have helped to trigger and accelerate regulatory and legislative reform. Take Ireland. Today, the Apple case could no longer occur. Ireland changed its corporate tax resident rules to prevent Irish incorporated companies from being stateless for tax purposes. But others, they also changed course. In the wake of the Fiat investigation, Luxembourg adopted substantial changes to its legislation to ensure compliance with the arm's length principles. They also clarified the tax treatment of financing companies. Therefore, also the Fiat case could not reappear today. In the Netherlands, tax ruling policy changed. Since 2019, the Netherlands adopted legislation to counter the use of shell companies to avoid or to evade taxes. A company is now required to have a meaningful economic presence in the Netherlands to obtain a tax ruling. In Cyprus, changes were made both back in 2013 and in 2017 in the transfer pricing area. Clearer rules as regards certain fiscal transactions and in the introduction of general transfer pricing principles inspired by the OECD. Beyond the specific legislative changes implemented by certain member states, a set of more wide-ranging legislative initiatives have been taken in the last decade. These initiatives were pushed by the Commission and spurred by the momentum of the state aid investigations. First, more fiscal transparency has been achieved through various amendments of the Directive on Administrative Cooperation in the field of taxation specifically. Since 2017, the automatic tax rulings between member states increased the use of such for tax advantage. Coordination of tax policy and more transparency, well, that helped restore a level playing field for all companies. Second, the OECD anti-base erosion and profiting measures have been implemented by EU thanks to the EU Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive. Right now, the Commission is in the process of checking the implementation of this directive by member states. Third, the EU also adopted the Directive on Global Minimum Taxation, the so-called Pillar 2, if one speaks OECD. Building on the work done by the OECD, this directive has introduced a minimum level of effective taxation of 15%. Finally, the Commission has adopted 2 legislative proposals. The first one aimed at fighting the use of shell entities and other arrangements for tax purposes. And more recently, one aiming to harmonize transfer pricing rules within the EU to ensure a common approach and a level playing field. Sadly, maybe not too surprising, the discussion in Council on these proposals is not progressing well. As part of the European semester and the implementation of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the Commission is also discussing with certain member states legislative reform to tackle aggressive tax planning measures and harmful tax competition. For example, we do that with Malta and with Cyprus. Despite these efforts, and as you can hear, this is quite a lot, the unfortunate truth is that aggressive tax planning is still widespread. According to the Commission's annual report on taxation, but also according to other studies, few member states, they be Ireland, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium, seems to be central when it comes to profit shifting. In 2022, multinationals' global corporate profits, they amounted to about $16 billion. $2.8 billion of these profits, they were made outside of the headquarters in other jurisdictions, in other tax jurisdictions. And about half of that was shifted to low tax countries, including countries within the European Union. And the cost is high for European citizens. Today marks a step forward, and it's encouraging. It's encouraging for us to do more. The Commission will continue its work on harmful tax competition and aggressive tax planning, both in terms of legislative proposals, but also enforcement. Do we implement what we have decided? I also invite member states to advance on the Commission proposals on transfer pricing and the use of shell companies. The member states, they hold now the right of initiative to push this forward. All these efforts, they come from a very simple principle: fairness. So fairness between big and small players. All companies, whether big or small, whether digital or brick and mortar, well, they must all pay their fair share of taxes in proportion to their European profits. Fairness between European companies, European countries. It cannot be that some member states, they allow sort of special deals to attract certain companies by offering effective low corporate tax rates, whether in other countries or companies, they pay their taxes. But maybe most importantly, social fairness. Because when big business do not pay their share, well, there's not the same financing for what constitutes our societies, the educational system, the health system, our infrastructure. This is necessary for our lives, but also to do business. And this is what creates prosperity for all of us. And this is why, of course, it's not fair if some companies sort of try to evade that responsibility for financing our public goods. Our efforts in defending these principles, well, it will continue at all levels, national, European, or international. Let me now turn to today's Google Shopping judgment, which we also won. This judgment by the Court of Justice upholds the Commission's Google Shopping decision. In that decision, the Commission found that Google favored, within its general search results, its own comparison shopping service, Google Shopping, over those services provided by rivals. The Court of Justice confirms that in certain circumstances, the favorable treatment of its own services by a dominant company can be a breach of Article 102 of the European Treaty. This important judgment validates the Commission's approach to such practices. We call them self-preferencing. Of course, a dominant company, as any other company, are free to innovate in all fields. But in doing so, they should compete on the merits of their innovation. However, they cannot lean on the competitive advantage that they hold because of their market power. Going forward, the Commission will, of course, make sure that the principle enshrined in this judgment, which is now final, are upheld to the benefit of all European consumers. The Google Shopping case is a landmark in the history of regulatory actions against big tech companies. It was one of the first significant antitrust cases brought by a competition agency against a major digital company. And I think this case marked a pivotal shift in how digital companies were regulated and also perceived. Before this case, the prevailing belief was that digital companies should be left to operate freely. They were seen as innovators driving positive change and growth. However, the European Commission's decision to investigate and subsequently to fine Google for abusing its market dominance in the comparison shopping service challenged this notion. And I think the case was symbolic because it demonstrated that even the most powerful tech companies could be held accountable. No one is above the law. It inspired regulators and policymakers worldwide to scrutinize the activities of digital giants more closely. And the Google Shopping case sets a precedent and paved the way for further regulatory action, including the Digital Markets Act of the European Union. In essence, the Google Shopping case was a catalyst for change, inspiring more vigilance and proactive approach to regulating big tech, and of course, ensuring also a fair digital marketplace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? It's good. Okay, let's take a couple of questions, perhaps first on the two judgments. Razieh, go ahead.
Thank you, Razieh Akoc, AFP News Agency. With these two decisions and their big victories, what message do you want to send to big tech? And the reason I ask this question is that we've got the two major legislation, the DSA, the DMA, which could then lead to legal cases. And so I'm wondering, do you have some words to say of like opening these cases and we'll still win after all of these years later? And linked to Google, you mentioned self-preferencing. We know that there's a DMA probe. I don't know enough, so I'm not going to say that they're completely related. But Google has said in their reaction that we made changes back in 2017 to comply. So I just wanted to ask, is it all okay with Google now on this issue, or is there more to see, more to be done? Thank you.
Well, the real messenger today is the Court of Justice, confirming what we did, which was challenged And as you know, we lost the Apple case in the first instance. Now we have won it in full. And we have taken legal risks in that process because this has not been done before. And I think that is important. And I think the message from the choices that we have made, when we think that we have a case, that we can prove it, that with, all the necessary procedures and due process in place, we will press on for cases. And we will keep, sometimes we use an old theory of harm in a novel situation, or we see a new theory of harm in markets that thought of themselves as, but of course we can do that. So I think that the message is that we will continue to do this. We will continue to push so that when we find abuses of dominant position, we will go after it. We do that now with innovation purposes. We do that when we're looking at the pipeline for new products. We do that in so many different ways. And also, the reason why I think also the specific case is important is that we will keep doing specific competition cases while at the same time enforcing the DMA. The two need to complement one another. So there's no reason to think that now we're all on the DMA and we will not do specific cases anymore. We will continue to do specific cases. And the DMA is also envisioning that because it can sort of be open so that we can put in new abusive practices if there is a need to do so. And of course, I hope that the reading of today's judgment is also reading saying, maybe it's better to be a compliant company. Maybe it is easier, to be on the right side of things. Because one of the things that I've been wondering in all these years is that I haven't had just one Google case, not just two, not just three. We're now on the fourth. We have, reoccurring cases with Amazon. We now have a Facebook case that is ongoing. It's the most admired, amazing, valuable companies on this planet. And yet, they are my most loyal customers. So if there is a message, well, it's easier and better to be compliant, also because it challenges yourself and forces you to be more innovative than you would otherwise have been. Because the smaller, they will challenge you if they have an open and contestable playing field to do so. And that, of course, is the point of the enforcement of the DMA. We have a number of non-compliance cases, which of course why it's even more important to underline that if we find that there is non-compliance, we will take the case and we will make that case and we'll also defend it in front of the courts.
Thank you. Go ahead with this. Yeah, go ahead, the gentleman there.
Jack Schickler from Euronews. When you took this tax crusade against tax rulings in the wake of LuxLeaks, it was seen as quite an innovative application of state aid law by some, a little bit controversial as well. And as you said, you've had plenty of court losses as well as victories. What advice do you have for your successor in whether to pursue similar kind of groundbreaking, innovative, risky applications of state aid law in the future, whoever she may be?
Well, I tend to disagree that it was that novel and groundbreaking and courageous, because it has always been that state aid can come in many different forms. It can be a grant, it can be a loan, it can be a guarantee, it can be a tax benefit. So that was not new. It's just, I think that the cases were bigger and the attention was much higher. And I think for me, it's very important to thank the investigative journalists who engaged in this, because the first thing you want to do when you open a tax case is to close it, because it's made to be so difficult that you think, I have a life, I will not spend it on doing this. And what the journalists have done is that they have made it possible to understand what is ongoing. And they timed it so that all over Europe, the news would carry the same story. Some companies are not paying their fair share of taxes. And I think that is why the cases were seen like this. And going forward, as said, we have now learned from the court how they see this. Member states have sovereignty in setting their corporate tax system. There can be European legislation, but that requires unanimity. You see the changes that we have made, but as such, member states can do it themselves. But they cannot not follow their own rules. And that, I think, is still important to pursue. And it is for the Commission to lift the burden of proof to say you're not following your own rules, which is, of course, why the Commission needs to continue asking questions. The Commission needs to continue following this very closely. One of the things that we have learned in these years is that a number of member states, a huge majority of member states, they do tax rulings perfectly fine. And we know that because we have looked into it. But as said, there is still, an occurrence of massive profit shifting into low tax territories. And the reports that I mentioned before, they show that actually European taxpayers, they lose more than taxpayers other places on the planet. So with the guidance from the courts, knowing that the problem still exists, of course, I would hope that my successor would make this one of many necessary priorities.
Thank you. Javier, please.
Thank you, Javier Espinosa, Financial Times. How surprised were you this morning on the categoric win for the Commission? And Apple CEO has referred to this whole process as total political crap. And I wonder if you had some reflection on his remarks. Thank you.
Well, on a scale from 1 to 100 of surprise or not surprise, I think I'm in 99. Of course, I found it very encouraging that the General Advocate, in his opinion, sided with us. But still, with the losses that we have had, everybody around me, they said, brace for negative impact. So this is very positive. And I had prepared for a stiff upper lip facing a possible defeat. But, it was the win that made me cry. Because it is very important. It's very important to show European taxpayers that once in a while, tax justice can be done. So, yes, I was positively surprised. And I think this is very, very important. Because it has shown what way the Commission can take. And it shows taxpayers that there can be fairness. And it has shown big companies that they are also not above the law when it comes to taxation.
Niklas.
Nicholas Hess from MLEX. You talked about massive profit shifting into some countries. I think you mentioned Ireland, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. From what you've seen, is there maybe a new strand of state aid cases that could look into that? Is that profit shifting that could be looked at under the tax cases, the tax ruling cases that you've done, or do you think there's more work that needs to be done to understand whether that new phenomenon, that continued phenomenon, complies with state aid law? And at the same time, can you update us on where the ongoing state aid tax investigations stand? I think there's a couple that have been ticking along, and what else you've got going on in Ireland?
Yes, no, you're right to say that we have a pipeline of state aid cases concerning tax. That will be for the next Commission to deal with that because we're not done yet. And as said, we have taken guidance from the court as to what is the burden that the Commission will have to lift in order to prove its cases. So in some of the cases, we need to ask more questions in order to do that. On profit shifting, actually, I don't know. The people in the Commission following profit shifting are not DG Competition. It is colleagues, and a lot of these legislative proposals, they have been driven forward by my colleague, Paolo Gentiloni. So very, very good work on their side. So if there is something that we can contribute from the competition side in these cases, I think that is for the next Commission to discuss. First and foremost, I think it's important for the new Commissioner to look at the pipeline and decide how to proceed.
Thank you, Leo.
Hello, thank you very much. Leo Lichtervoet from Context. I had a question that is kind of a follow-up to the question asked by my colleague from Euronews. You mentioned a few legislative texts that are still in the works on the fiscality side. During your mandate, you've also pushed forward the DMA, giving you new tools to fight abuse of dominant positions. You still have a lot of tools that are quite, I won't say outdated, but that are quite old. The Commission recently published its evaluation of the antitrust regulation, the merger regulation. Yesterday, Mario Draghi said that the competition policy needs to be revamped completely. He had some words about the Illumina Grey ruling from last week, which was differing from today, a defeat for the Commission. Do you think that the next Commissioner will have to propose new tools to avoid having a mandate? I don't know how long they will stay in office, but to avoid spending their whole mandate defending cases against the court, such as what you did during the past 10 years. Thank you.
Well, we live in separate realities because we have not spent these 2 mandates defending our cases. We have spent these 2 mandates being really, really, really busy doing cases. We have collected, I forgot, actually I have the number here, billions and billions and billions in fines. We have saved European consumers, I don't know how many billions, because of cartels, misuse of dominant position. We've been really busy. Of course, we defend our cases, but we can only defend cases that we have done. And we have a pipeline of cases for the next Commission to decide upon. And the reason why we have evaluated Reg 1 is, of course, to know how had it worked. It was revolutionary when Reg 1 was implemented because it decentralized the enforcement of European competition law. And the thing is that is really important because 85% of decisions taken due to European competition law is taken by member states. And the fact that we evaluate is, of course, it's important to see, well, this was a big success. Is there something that we can do better? And there are things that we can do better because Reg 1 was made sort of pre-digital. So figuring out how to make sure that we have a very efficient access to file. Can we do better than the changes that we've made so far? How can we be faster? The second thing is that we have been reading through all the court guidance on 102. I think there are like 34 different judgments. It's very difficult to keep 34 different judgments present. So we have drafted guidelines for the first time in this area for people to take the knowledge from these judgments and to know in one piece of guideline, okay, this is how the Commission sees all these judgments. I think really important progress. Also, I think we might have read the Draghi report differently because I did not see a call for a complete revamping of competition policy. Not at all. I see on a number of instances we are in complete agreement. In other instances, there are things to discuss, but a complete revamping. But of course, now we have the game of interpreting the word of Draghi, which is always exciting.
Thank you. Let me take a question online. Sorry, Edith from Politico, please.
Hi, thanks for doing this press conference today. I have a question vaguely similar to the one asked about invited to the next Commission on state aid, but I actually want to talk more about Apple. So historically, Apple has been a little bit more in the background with antitrust cases compared to other big tech companies, and more recently that's not been the case. And in turn, Apple has become, I think it's quite fair to say, confrontational in its response to a lot of European Commission intervention, especially on the DMA. So my question to you is, what advice would you give the next commissioner on dealing with Apple in future investigations and in these kind of in these dialogues?
Well, actually, we just had an agreement with Apple on them opening up the access to competitors so that they can offer payment solutions. You know, it's not the hardware of the near-field communication chips, but the software that goes around it, which should be an easy way for competitors actually to be able to offer their services on our phones. We have a discussion with Apple about how to do a choice screen. As you may know, we have suspended the DMA investigation for a few weeks until we see how that choice screen actually materializes. And then, of course, we have some of the more confrontational issues, that is clear. In the Apple Music case, we are following up to see if Apple lives up to it. For music streaming services, they have offered specific better access in order actually to communicate with their customers. We're also following that very closely. So I'd say, all in all, that it's a mixed bag of approaches. And I think what has been important for me is to say, well, we work with companies in order for them to be compliant. We don't work against a company. And that is important because a company is also a culture. It is thousands of employees who may or may not agree with their top management. So what is important for us is the change of behavior. And that's, for that, we have been successful in some circumstances and less successful in other circumstances. One of the things where we are less successful is, of course, if things takes a lot of time. Because what happens when things takes a lot of time is that in digital markets, the market may die or be fully taken over by the big tech that we are investigating. And this is also why both the guidelines, the evaluation of Reg 1 is important to figure out how can we still keep increasing our speed. We've done a number of things to be faster, but there are still some things that we might be able to improve. Of course, inherently, we will also always be slower because it's fast to break the law. It is slow to prove that someone has broken the law.
Thank you. Lady in the green, I see.
Thank you very much. Danielle Weber with the Luxembourg Public Radio. You mentioned the cases you lost, and there were some against Luxembourg concerning Amazon, Engie, and Fiat. Now, looking back, would you say that maybe Luxembourg just played by the rules, did nothing wrong, or was it just behaving in a more clever way, maybe? What do you make of these cases? Have you given up on them, or do you think it would be worth coming back to these cases? Could you give us an update on that? Thank you very much.
Well, actually, that is quite a tricky legal question. What to do when your decision has been annulled by the court, but you still have the opening, what then to do? But leave that aside for today. One of the things that I really appreciate with the Luxembourg governments that I've been working with is that we have been working with the Luxembourg government. As said, as one example, the Fiat case cannot repeat itself because of the changes made as to how a financing company can work within an incorporated multinational. I think Luxembourg has also implied more transparency as to how to get a tax ruling, what you need to present in order to get a tax ruling. And I think these are important progress on the side of Luxembourg. So I have had a good cooperation with the Luxembourg governments. I appreciate the changes that they have made. And now we will deal with the losses specifically. As said, it's a legal thing as to how exactly to do that. And of course, we'll take the learnings from the court as set sovereignty by the member state to set the laws of their land. an obligation then to follow those laws. And of course, that is still important, because what we have seen is that it is if a country does not follow its own laws that we get this situation. One of the reasons why it is an important Commission proposal that all member states incorporate the arm's length principle in the same way is that it's a bit unfair that for those who have incorporated it in full, we can watch over if they use it in full. For those who have not implemented it in full, we cannot hold that as a standard that they have to live up to. So I think that would be a really big progress. It's quite a simple piece of legislation, because all member states say that they do accept and use the OECD arm's length principle. What we know from the court is that in order for that actually to bite, it also needs to be directly incorporated in national legislation. And that work, of course, should continue.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for the question. Sarah Collins from the Business Post in Ireland. You can probably guess what I'm going to ask. Back in 2016, you said that other countries might have a shot at getting a piece of this 13 billion euro pie. I wonder, what was that assessment based on? Is that still the case as you understand it? And if they don't, what should Ireland do with the money itself? And a second question, since 2016, Ireland's corporate tax revenues have almost tripled. I think we're on course to earn about 30 billion this year. And because you mentioned Ireland is a centre for aggressive tax planning, is that something that concerns you? Do you think there's something going on behind the scenes here that the Commission should investigate? Thanks.
One of the several positive changes in Ireland is that they are much more diligent in auditing. For instance, they made a big audit of Google a couple of years ago that brought in more taxation from Google. I think that is really positive. What I was citing was the question of profit shifting, which still seems to be ongoing despite the changes made and despite the legislative changes, both in member states and in general. I think maybe some member states considered it at the time of the Apple decision, but I have not followed what came of it. As things stand now, this is not for us at all. And the next thing that will have to happen is that the unpaid taxes that have been in this escrow account will have to be released to the Irish state. What they will do with it, of course, is completely up to them.
Thank you. Simon van der Ruppe for Follow the Money. Question on the Google case. You mentioned before that there is now a fourth Google case ongoing. Does the decision of the court today have any bearing on that ruling? Does it on that case, which I believe is in an advanced stage? And yeah, do you think that's also a case you will leave for your successor to decide on? Thank you.
So the Google case that we have right now, we call it the Google Ante case. It's a question of an inherent conflict of interest. When you buy and sell room for advertising, you have a marketplace owned by Google. You have someone who is selling space for advertising owned by Google. And you have someone who buys place for advertising owned by Google. That's the rough version of this setup, I can tell you. So as you say, we're quite advanced. We sent them a statement of objection. In that we said, we don't see any other way out of this than a divestiture in order for the inherent conflict of interest to be broken. There's been a bit of back and forth that they have answered, so we are relatively advanced, but I cannot give you any timing. Interestingly, in the US, similar case is beginning in front of the courts of the US. It is the DOJ who is pressing charges against Google, more or less same. I think we will have the result on the liability in itself in, I don't know the timing, but it is within relatively few weeks we are hoping for, because that, of course, will also be interesting for us to see how the US courts say about this. It is a completely different setup than the Google Shopping case, which was about self-preferencing, so there's no connection between the two.
Okay, thank you. Let me take a question online. I see more hands, but we can continue, so no worries. Samuel from Bloomberg. We cannot see.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and we can see you. Go on.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Executive Vice President. Samuel Stolten at Bloomberg here. So we have 4 Google cases, over 8 billion in fines, a series of court cases, many appeals, and now the DMA. What exactly is the end game here? When will we get to the stage of Google being the business that you would like it to be? And first, with many of these issues across different quarters of Google's business, what is the silver bullet for these problems to be remedied? And should the culture of behavioural orders and fines continue, or is it now time to finally once and for all break up big tech in order to get to the heart of some of these problems? Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, fortunately, one of the things I've learned in these years is that there's no silver bullet, there's no slam dunk. It's crazy complicated, but very often the result is the same, that consumers pay for lack of innovation, for higher prices, for having to pay more and more with their data. So I don't think that there is an end game. On the contrary, we're trying to cooperate competition law enforcers around this planet. Just recently, we agreed with the DOJ and the FTC of the US and the CMA of the UK about an approach for artificial intelligence. Because as we see it, of course, there is a risk that the problems that we see, they will be fueled by artificial intelligence and may make entrenchment even bigger. So I don't think that anyone will be out of work. If there is a real awakening among big tech to say, listen, okay, let's get on the right side of things, that would be really positive, because we need a world of innovation. We need a world where companies can be started and scaled and challenge big companies. That is the situation that we should approach. And that is the purpose of the individual cases. That is the purpose of the DMA. And as I hear colleagues around the world, this is also what they want to achieve. But the end game, I'm afraid we're only at the beginning, or more rather, the end of the beginning for this really, really important for our global economic dynamic.
Thank you. The gentleman in the back with the, yes.
Thank you, Jan Disseldorf for Süddeutsche Zeitung from Germany. Given that your most likely predecessor has, let's say, an approach to competition and state aid policy that is less strict, and given that there are many ideas floating around of loosening the rules for state aid and for merger restrictions, how high a risk do you see that the Commission might not be as bold as it used to be while you were in office? And how far are you concerned about the Commission being less bold in the future, especially on state aid?
Well, it kind of depends how you define bold. I think we have been bold in the IPCIs that we have enabled. So these big projects of common European interest, we now have 10. They are 2 in batteries, 4 in hydrogen, 2 in microelectronics, 1 in cloud and 1 in health. The public and the private investment in this is more than 100 billion euros. I think it's not 50-50. I think it's 40% would be public funding, 60% would be the private funding. So it's a lot of public funding going into this. I think this is bold. I think it's completely justified. It's a lot of taxpayers' money going into cutting-edge innovation. But as said, I think completely justified. It's the same size as the European Horizon budget. And yet we have established these cutting-edge innovation projects in 6 years or so, working with, I think the total is 240 businesses and more than 2,000 other businesses and university and research organization who gets the benefit of this. I think that is bold. When you look at our work to enable member states to support the investment in semiconductor production, I think that is bold as well. Italy doing something very interesting, for instance, in Sicily, where they support sort of from the granulate that can make the wafer all the way to the packaged semiconductor. They support it. We will have, I hope, big investments in Germany. Also bold, but a lot of aid actually being distributed. We have the speed of first the temporary framework for COVID, and then the temporary framework sort of cushioning for the crisis of energy and the war in Ukraine. Also quite bold, enabling a lot of state aid. What I'm saying with these examples is that one should not measure whether you're bold with strictness or not strictness. You should measure it whether it's legitimate and enables the European economy to thrive without destroying that competition, which is an essential, necessary part of any kind of competitiveness, because the business is challenged. And what we have been doing with the temporary framework in looking at these important projects, when we look at the investment in semiconductor production, is that there is a level playing field, that other businesses still have, their fair chance to compete. And I think that's the important point. And that I think that is what the Commission will be held up to, because that is the standard set fundamentally by the treaty. And of course, you need to change things. We have changed a lot of things in these 10 years. So there is not something set in stone that can then be changed, and that is a revolution or complete break. But we need to develop things. But the standard is that we defend competition in order for that to push us to be still more innovative and still more competitive.
Maybe we stay on the topic of state aid. Yes, go ahead. If you have.
Yes, hello, Jade Gandin from L'Opinion. It's actually a follow-up to this question. Do you think it's important where the competition portfolio will land in the next Commission? Because there are many discussions about it moving. So can you give us your experience about where it should land and where it should not land? Thank you.
Well, it's not floating. It is hardworking. The privilege of holding the competition portfolio is that you work to the very last day and then you hand on the baton for the next person. However, one organizes the Commission is not for me, and I have not developed an opinion about that.
Thank you. Let's go there, David, please.
Thank you, David Carretta, Radio Radicale. For once, not a question on Alitalia, but on Draghi. On Draghi, it was a joke. On Draghi report, we have seen your tweet yesterday on what you agree with him or his report. I'm wondering, what would you discuss with him? What would you want to discuss that you don't like so much? Thank you.
Well, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is this question of European market when it comes to the telco sector. Because what has been very important in the work that we have done, and we have made a new notice on how we actually work with defining markets, because it's not something that we, it's not automatic, it's not something that we just think. It's a very sort of fact-based evaluation of what is the market like. So just assuming that we have a European market does not fit with the approach that we have had for the last 10 years and many, many more years behind that. Because the market is defined by the fact that if consumers can still turn to someone else, you have not reached the the boundaries of that market. If merging parties, they increase prices, can you go to someone else? Fine, the market is that big. So assuming a European market does not fit with what I have seen and what we have done. I think we agree on the necessity of having a European telco market, but that doesn't come from defining it as European. That comes from the very hard work of spectrum harmonization, of administrative practices and how that market is regulated. And that could encourage that cross-border mergers actually could harvest efficiencies, and that would make them much more interesting. And then there would still be competition, even with merging companies. Because that is what is important for me as well. Not only, of course, consumers' choice and that they are protected against price increases that comes from monopolies or duopolies or the like, but also that there is a push for investment. And so far, we have not seen proof that bigger businesses invest more. Usually you would invest more if your competitor could get there first, if you do not invest yourself. Just to give you an example of what I think is important to keep discussing.
Thank you. Please go ahead, middle row.
Thanks. Diego Velasquez with the Luxembourger Wort. I'm coming back to taxation. Most of your high-profile cases come from your first mandate, and so do most legislative proposals in the field of tax justice. How do you explain the slowing down on the agenda of tax justice during the first von der Leyen Commission? Because in my opinion, I don't think that the need for tax revenues has slowed down in the last 5 years. And what would you recommend to the following Commission when it comes to the field of tax justice? Thank you.
Well, it is of course right that we haven't had a number of state aid tax cases in this mandate. I found that it was proper to wait for the guidance of the court in order to see, well, what were the limits of what we could do and what were also the positive guidance that the court would give us on what we could do. Because the courts are very important in how the European institution, how they work together. So I thought that was prudent. Remember, maybe we had a discussion about we should issue guidance about how to do tax rulings and all that, and said we cannot do that because we do not have, the court rulings to guide us. But the Commission has not been leaning back in general. The two proposals that I mentioned, the one on harmonizing the approach to the arm's length principle is from this mandate, the other legislative proposal as well. The decision to implement the OECD Pillar 2, so the effective 15% tax rate, also from this mandate. So it's definitely not so that the Commission has leaned back. It's just that specifically for the state aid tax cases, I think it's important that we have had the court guidance. We've had a lot of it, and now we know much more what we can do and how we can do cases if we have a suspicion that something is wrong.
Thank you. Maybe we take last 2-3 questions. The lady in the back there.
Thank you. Hi, Elodie Lamer with Tax Notes. I have a question that is a bit building up on what Diego just asked. I mean, right now, because of Pillar 2 and this need for competitiveness and the need to declutter the tax system, lowering the burden on companies, it seems to me that we're going to go the other way, that we're not going to deregulate, but make sure that businesses have a more business-friendly environment to work with. So how do we reconcile the need to fight tax avoidance and the need for more competitiveness and a more business-friendly environment? Thank you.
Well, the most business-friendly environment is a business environment where everybody pays their taxes. Because the unfairness here is that some corporations, primarily multinationals, they can evade, some of them, while smaller businesses, well, they work very hard to make a profit. From that profit, they pay their taxes. So I think a business-friendly environment is an environment where you compete on the merits and not by having an arrangement which lowers your effective taxation. And I think it can be done in different ways. As said, one of the things that the court has said is that member states have sovereignty in setting their own corporate tax system if they're not agreeing to a European set of legislation. So I think the ball is very much in the court of member states to look at their corporate taxation system to make sure that it is simple and effective, but as said, friendly for all businesses so that everybody contributes.
Okay, Kim.
Thanks. Kim McCrail from the Wall Street Journal. I wanted to ask about what has changed in the global regulatory environment since you launched these cases and others. When you first launched these two and some of the others against big tech companies, the EU looked a little bit more on its own in pursuing some of these. Since then, as you mentioned, you've got the ad tech case that the US is actually pursuing and will go to court. You've had other cases come up in the US. You've got a UK antitrust agency that is focused on some of these cases as well. How has that changed what you do? Has that made you feel a little less alone in going after these cases? And what impact does it have now that you've got, for example, the ad tech case that you're pursuing actually being looked at in the US? What impact will whatever comes out of the US courts have on what you're looking at? Thanks.
Well, you partly answered your question yourself, telling about the cases that are now being pursued in the UK and the US. I think they're very important that more jurisdictions would do this, and I think other jurisdictions as well. We have the Turkish authorities, we have the Indian authorities. There are a number of authorities globally who would have cases that concerns big tech behavior in their market. Two things are important here. First, if you have global companies, but we do not have global competition law enforcement, it's important that we are somewhat on the same track. Also for the ease of doing business, also when you're big tech, that you actually know, okay, what are the rules that I'm supposed to live by, and not some in some jurisdiction and others in other jurisdictions, some in a third jurisdiction. But also that it changes the approach. I think when I first came with the first Google case on the Hill in Washington, it was like, who is that crazy woman? Because big tech was, the pride, they were admired, they could do nothing wrong. Over these 10 years, that has shifted quite dramatically, not only among politicians, but also among citizens. And I think that's really healthy, because a company that is seen as the pride that can do nothing wrong is not being criticized, is not being challenged. And criticism and the challenges is, of course, what keeps everyone in doing their best. So I think in both respects, it is important. I'm very encouraged by the work that colleagues do around this planet.
Thank you. One last question, please, to the lady in the first row.
Hi, Lisa Hesselund from TV2 Denmark. I want to ask you, broaden it up a little bit, and if we look at the possible consequences of these rulings today, or maybe the spillover effects, if you will, isn't there a risk with these rulings and with all the regulation we have in the EU that we might push out these big tech companies completely out of the European markets? And if so, is that a sacrifice that is worth it in order to uphold law and order in the EU? And then, if I may, a more personal question, because you are now in the last weeks of your 10-year career here at the European Commission. How do you look at your legacy, your political legacy that you leave behind? And could you maybe tell us about what you consider your biggest loss, your biggest win during these 10 years? Thank you.
On the first part of your question, do we push out big tech? Europe is a formidable place to do business. 450 million customers who use technology, who are quite tech savvy. I want to see it before I believe it, that you would leave such a market. I think you would want to stay. I would hope that what we do actually increases the number of businesses that we can choose from, that the market is open. We have French AI companies, we have, companies here and there who pop up and have something to offer, but they need market access. And that is the point of regulation. It is to give market access. It's not to stiffen, it's not to make it more difficult. It is to give market access so that we as consumers have choice. And I think that is very important also for innovation. And if you talk about legacy, of course, it's better with the win today. Had we lost, it would have been different. I'm happy to see you all, but I think you would have been even more encouraged had we lost the case to come here, because it's kind of more fun than when the Commission wins. It's a bit, oh yeah, of course, everybody saw that coming. Well, not so much, I can tell you. So I think it's difficult to say something about the legacy because the cases, they are very different. They have their different approach to things. So I know sometimes this is disappointing because most people, they want to hear that Google case was the best one, that whatever case was the saddest one. But the best thing that I have experienced in these 2 years is the people that I have worked with. There would have been no Apple tax case had it not been for a formidable team. Because as I said, I was ready to face the loss, but it was the win that made me cry. And looking at how clever they are, how diligent they are, how they work together to make our cases, unbelievable. When we have a merger case, and the merger goes through, then the lawyers, they get a bonus. Millions of euros. What the team gets is another case. And they may have worked round the clock in order to meet the deadlines. When we have an antitrust case, once we have the decision, what they get is that they have to wait years to hear if the court confirms it or not. And in the state aid cases, I think by now 93, and it used to be 95, it's only because of COVID that it fell a bit. 93% of all state aid is done by member states. We have decentralized it. They do a lot of things themselves. We only deal with the really tricky cases. And yet we are always told that we're too slow. Even when we are looking at our mailbox and waiting for member states to respond to our answers, or just to tell us if they still want to do this. So the most amazing things of those 10 years is working with people, real people whose willingness to serve Europeans is undisputed. They're just very, very good.
Thank you very much. I think this brings us to a quite emotional end of this press conference today. Thanks, big thanks to you, and thank you all for participating.